What's up, everybody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Lucas Vos in the virtual studio. The first time I remember bumping into Lucas was when Paul Vander Klay highlighted a video made by Charlie Brown from the channel Charlie's Little Corner, where Charlie was having a conversation with a person. They seemed very genuine in their approach to their discussion about meaning. That person was Lucas. From there, the connection seemed more vague, bumping into him on X, formerly known as Twitter, and maybe seeing him on another video from Charlie's channel. Then last week, he popped into a live stream I was conducting on the topic of trust. We connected and decided to schedule some time to come on the Yours Truly podcast and practice some conversation craft. From what I've gathered, Lucas is finishing up his undergraduate studies in Egyptology in the Netherlands. He is engaged to be married and thinking about going for Latin America studies in his master's. He also operates his YouTube channel at Lucas Vos, B-O-Z, where he facilitates long-form conversations. He just last week had on Paul Vander Klay and has had opportunities to converse with John Vervaeke as well. Recently, he's had some other big names on his podcast, such as Robert Breedlove from the What is Money podcast and DC Schindler. I look forward to talking to Lucas today about those experiences and getting to know him better. His YouTube banner reads, Pursuing Truth, Goodness, and Beauty, the Lucas Vos podcast. May we find ourselves in that pursuit here today as well. So, without further delay, I give you Lucas Vos. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.
That was so cool, man. You got this stuff down. I feel like I'm on a TV show or something. This is awesome.
Yeah, I keep, it's a fun little process. These are, modern, American, I didn't really work at a mega church, but I worked for like these church camps, and we'd have all this kind of production. And so it's just kind of a part of me, like that stuff. So it's fun. Yeah, man. It's like, cool. Yeah, here we are.
Yeah. It feels like it's good. It's good. It's like you're in the right state of mind thanks to it partially. Like I feel like now I'm really ready, No,
yeah, well, it is. When I had Lon Luke Thompson, he talked about it being kind of like a liturgy, like this. Yeah, and it feels like that, kind of this programming thing kind of gets, you're walking through something. So yeah, I kind of get that. So on that, my question, this is a question that's starting to kind of like be one of my things, is like, how do you think we got to this conversation? That's what I want to know. How, from your perspective.
The two of us, how we got to this conversation?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how far back we go, but you spoke in the intro about our first interaction. You seeing me on Stefan's channel, Charlie's Little Corner. So in a way, that is what started that. I think I saw you popping by on Twitter first a couple of times where I saw your face pop up in some pictures. I think it was like the Symbolic World Summit going on recently. And then I found out that you have been very consistent with your channel, which makes me interested in your personality. You must be very conscientious with the content you're putting out. It's very, very, very good, high quality. And so in a way, that's it. But in another way, I think the way we got together is, I think everyone is born with certain God-given interests, and a lot of that is not my choice. But for some reason, we are both interested in having long-form conversations. For some reason, we are both interested in questions pertaining to faith and reality and exploring those. And we also like the personal aspect. So given that we're that similar in that regard, I think it was kind of inevitable for us to bump past. And also, I love speaking to people who have podcasts themselves.
Yeah.
Because I like their listeners, I love listeners. I told Ken Lowry. So yeah.
What about that with Ken?
Well, Ken is like, you watch a talk with Ken, he will just shut up for 40 minutes. And that's awesome. I love that. Like when he's speaking to DC Schindler and John Vervaeke, and there's just this guy, I didn't know who he was, but it's Ken Lowry. And I spoke to him recently just to hear more of his side, because he listens so well in his conversations that he only absolutely, he only adds something when it's absolutely necessary and valuable. So yeah, that's why I discussed that listening. But yeah, tell me, why do you think we've gotten together?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you could see. I had another part of the intro where I told a little bit from my perspective since I had
Yeah.
you bumped out, but it was seeing him on I guess you could hear it said on Charlie's channel and stuff or
Mhm.
Stefan's channel. Yeah, and I don't know. You have a distinct look, man. You're like your profile picture like is very recognizable. So I think there's something to that, and um, so that this small world that I've bumped into. I've just been doing this stuff since January and kind of learning about this subculture underneath, kind of from my perspective, obviously like this Jordan Peterson, but the Paul Vander Klay side a little bit. Obviously, there's other parts like Vervaeke and Symbolic World and stuff, but the more relational side that I've been operating in was under Paul Vander Klay,
Yeah.
and so you're just kind of like seeing these things, and he'll highlight something, or he highlights something I did, or and it's just like pointing your attention towards things, and then like you said, like look at your channel, like, oh, this guy's like the same kind of thing, like takes this seriously. He's working on this, and I mean, you've been kind of putting content out for a while. You have like 900 videos, and
Yeah.
so you've had some different, like, I'm sure, journeys along the way, and you were at that point you were a young teenager or something, like, because I think you said on your conversation with Paul, 22,
Yeah. 22
about to
now.
finish up school. So yeah, I'm a good 15 to a little bit more years older than you. So and
Yeah.
um, but that's another piece of, you mentioned the I guess the ethic or the conscientiousness of the channel. So I mean, yeah, there is a personality aspect of that. Uh, when I used to like lead and operate like one of these Christian worship bands, there was let's get this song, very very good and as good as we possibly can, and and then there's like the networking of it. There's the going and preparing for this event, and like I'm managing a little bit of social media, even though back then it was not what it is today. Like I've not done that since 2016. And even though for me that feels like not that long ago, like there's a lot that's changed, especially in your life, from 2016. So I'm playing catch up on a lot of that in some ways, but that's where some of that comes from. And then, like you said, you can kind of recognize it in other people when they're operating a certain way. So that kind of leads me. Well, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about that, but
No, I'm happy with that. That's great.
so that kind of leads me, I guess, even one of the things that stuck out to me initially when you were talking to Paul. I watched that whole podcast because you and I both like recently just like talked to him right back to back.
Yeah.
Um, was the part you said when and I would assume it's probably when you were talking to Robert Breedlove, like you said that you felt a spirit kind of come over you. That was, you said something like nasty or so, I don't remember how you described it. It was, and
Yeah.
I
Okay.
shared about that myself when on my third podcast, I'm talking to Jordan Hall. Of course, he's doing his own thing with all that. But like, as soon as he said yes, I felt something just completely, like his status and all that kind of stuff, like wash over me. It was very uncomfortable. And I was asking people to pray for me because I just like all these things. And coming from when I was your age, like, it's really cool to hear you talking to Paul about like that feeling. Because when I was your age, I wouldn't have said anything out loud about that,
Yeah.
and I would have just maybe tried to pretend to be humble and all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, this is. So I was interested in for one, why you shared that. I get, well, you were looking for some help, but also, yeah, more about what that experience, the last couple of people, and how you've dealt with that mentally or whatever.
That's perfect. I started this YouTube channel a couple of years ago, and I started it partially because I realized that if you want to get successful at something like YouTube, you have to do it consistently for a long time before you even start to get good at it, or you have to add some prior experiences that makes you good at content creation. So I just started putting stuff out, and I never really questioned what my goal was. I thought I was just like, I want to make money at some point with this, and I never questioned that until I started this podcast, I think, or even maybe a bit before that. I was like, do I even want to make this as a career? And then I started looking at, okay, who has this as a career and who doesn't? And Paul doesn't. And Paul seems to be a very grounded person, something that I aspire to be. And so I went to Paul with this because he's doing that successfully, and I'm sure that he has some template of that, because he could have walked a different path. He could have gone more commercial, as some of the other guys did. And what he says is true also in the podcast, is that for some people, that's just what they want to do. They want to make a career out of YouTube, but I don't think that's good for me. Like, I'm trying to live a very wise life as much as possible. So I'm trying to listen to the right people. And it rang very true to me that it's unwise to want to grow your name and your brand so quickly and so, in a way, mindlessly, because you're not really considering all the implications of getting a bigger name for yourself. I think fame is not something that I want. I don't know a lot of people that deal well with fame, and I've been thinking about that a lot recently. So that's why that question popped up. And also because of the recent experiences, yes. So I had Robert on, I had David Schindler on, I had Kurt Jaimungal on from the Theories of Everything podcast. And I noticed that what you say when you had Jordan Hall on, that there's like this lower part of myself that's like, oh yes, getting these views and getting this exposure. But that's really not a good part of myself, because the good part of myself just wants to help people the most. It wants to spread love and, I guess, goodness. I always find it's hard to that's why my banner says pursuing truth, goodness, and beauty, because I haven't found better words for it yet, what I'm trying to do with all of this. But yeah, so that's where that came from. And I think really talking to Paul actually helped me a lot with this question. And so I want to also get back to doing smaller, quote unquote, smaller conversations, because I think they're in many ways better for me, because they're people
Well,
that
you're
want to
welcome.
be heard.
You're
Huh?
welcome. Yeah,
But
man.
yeah, that's I guess what I would say about it.
Couple of interesting things. You know, that you said you want to seek wisdom. I remember being your age and wanting to. I mean, I was in this other subculture trying to pursue a type of recognition with like the Christian music worship scene.
Yeah.
Like around 2005, 2006, and I don't. Yeah, there weren't these questions. There was just this. What's the appropriate behavior that you think people want you to how that you want people to think you're thinking about this stuff? And it was a question. It was a cognitive dissonance for me, thinking, okay, I'm supposed to be doing this thing that's called worship. That's supposed to be about God, but for me to like do this, I have to promote myself. And I always found that was like a dissonant idea. Didn't know what to do with it. Ended up, I don't know if you've watched stuff more about my story. That part of my life completely was a train wreck, because I was a worship pastor at a church, and I was unfaithful to my wife, and all that went away. And that was in 2016. So talk about wisdom. That's the complete opposite of wisdom. That's foolishness. The Proverbs speak about that very directly. So, yeah, you're completely right in that if you aren't conscientious of it, if you aren't purposeful in it, and you just do what you think you're supposed to do or act like you're supposed to act, being a good person or something, that stuff will, if you don't approach it honestly, yeah, it can destroy you.
Yeah.
And I don't know there were a lot of other factors involved in that, but that's definitely a piece of it. So, I give that to you. And I also think that another person that I've talked to on here that I think would be an interesting person for you to talk to is Noah, he has a channel called President Foxman. I don't know if you've seen him bounce around, but he's about your age, and y'all are both Gen Z, appropriate, very much so. And he's asking the same questions, and I think I think it's wonderful to bump into people that are 20s, early 20s, asking that question about how can I be wise in this space, because and you have a few people that maybe can be sages that only have like 5 years of the ahead of you or something, or like but they're older. And I actually had that conversation with Karen Wong, which I know you talked to her as well a little bit about. Like, that's how I was kind of looking at it when I'm thinking I'm just getting started trying to do some of this stuff, and these people have experience and how they've approached it. So I don't know, man. That's kind of that's what I have to bounce back. I think you're
absolutely.
on a good trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, now I am. The thing is, people often tell me, "Oh, you're 22, you're so early with this," and I'm like, "Yeah, but that's no guarantee that I will be in 10 years." Like I
Right.
have to continuously do this work, and it counts for everyone. Like I'm never in the clear with this. Getting married, and people's like, "Oh, you made it, you're married." And it's like, well, this is where it starts, like you got to do the work. It doesn't like end once you're there. There's not like this moment of now you can relax or something. But it's not in a bad way. Like I love doing good work to be good and to be wise. But
So
yeah, it's only just beginning. Yeah, go ahead.
You're getting married pretty young, maybe compared to. Is that are you an anomaly where you're from?
Yeah, absolutely.
I got
And the
married when
first
I
of
was
my
22.
sorry.
I got married when I was 22.
Oh yeah, awesome.
Mhm.
Let me share that. No, it's definitely an anomaly here. I think the average age might be, I think, late 20s for sure, if not later. I think especially for the guys, later. But I just realized that I think when I was 18 or 19 that I didn't want to pursue short-term relationships. I wanted to pursue one very long-term relationship. And I think I owe a lot of that to Peterson, to be honest. I think he really inspired me with that. Um, like Peterson, I think is one of the very few people in the public eye that's kind of like in a semi-secular sphere of the world that is able to explicitly explain why it is good to find one person. And so with my materialistic brain that I had and still partially have at that time, he was the voice I needed to hear for that, because I'd heard plenty of times that it's good, to get married, but it didn't have the right reasoning that I wanted it to have. And Peterson I think he's brilliant at bridging the secular and the religious, I guess. I was like thinking about Peterson. He's such an enigmatic figure, but undeniably compelling. But yeah, so it's definitely an anomaly, but I'm extremely happy about it. People in my environment are happy about it. I've been very surprised with how positively this has been received in our environment. Um, People that are older than us, that still haven't gotten married, so they're so positive, and I think a lot of people, they know about themselves, even if they're not currently in a relationship where they want to move toward that. A lot of them still in the back of their minds have that this is something that they want eventually in the future, which I think you were raised in Arkansas. Is that true?
Yeah,
I think
still there.
that is maybe in your environment it's more normal
A
to
little
have
bit.
that. Yeah, a
It
little bit,
depends
right?
on kind of what class you're in. Socioeconomics.
Yeah.
The later, the more upper class you are, the more you push it off generally. But it comes with a limit, because that's also the world that is preserving certain parts of like the nuclear normalcy is actually the upper class too. And here
Yeah.
it's not as pronounced, because it's not like we're a huge state, with major metropolitan centers and stuff. But yeah, some of that. I think one of the other things that's interesting about like Peterson's work is that, I mean, you making that choice as an individual, or you and your fiance, is actually having a pretty big impact on relationships. Like you're saying, like we think that it's like, oh, we can't do anything or we don't have that. But what it sounds like is, it's probably, oh, your 28-year-old friend that's like, oh, damn, maybe I
Yeah,
maybe I should
yeah,
pull the trigger if this kid pulls the trigger, like that's a big deal.
yeah.
And I think that's a big part of his work. When did you
Mm.
come in contact with stuff, and when did he start having like a serious impact on your thinking?
So I spoke a bit about this with Paul, that my brother Aaron, who's also a part of this little corner, I'm sure he's familiar with your channel. Um, he's a bit of a lurker, but he's been invested into Peterson's work as soon as Peterson gained any notoriety, I think. So what's that, 2017
Yeah,
or so?
16, 17, yeah.
Yeah,
Bill
yeah,
16, it was all kind of happening then.
yeah, exactly. So he was in there back then already, and he would speak about that at home. Um, and then when Peterson started his more meaningful content, I would say, with the biblical lectures and stuff like this, he introduced it to my father, who is a theologian. Oh goodness, I need to quickly get my battery in. 1 second.
Oh, no. It'll still
But
stay if
talking
you're
to
it
so very
it'll
quick.
hang on. It'll hang on. I heard, uh-oh. So, I need some good branding here. I did hear, this is the big mystery, I guess. I did hear that Lucas's dad was a theologian, and people in this space, y'all might know who that is. I don't know. So I'm going to ask him um, who his dad is and what work he's been involved in. I'm going to see what I got here. Uh-oh. Founder of nothing. I just seen that. Here he comes. Hey there. Could
I'm
you hear me
going
ramble?
to make. Yeah, I can hear you good, man. I get a notification. I got 5 seconds. Can you believe that?
Wow, that's not very good.
No. Well, it's okay. This is the computer I bought. It's the life I chose. But yeah, so my my brother, he would talk about Peterson a lot. I think he was transformed by Peterson himself in a way, because he was more of an atheist.
Hmm.
Um, Going into college, he went to university college, different part of the country, and then I think partially Peterson brought him back to the faith. And I think that just by virtue of him speaking about it so much, eventually I had to deal with that and confront his work. Aaron has always been very influential on me in, for example, the music I listen to, and especially the books I read and the people I listen to. Um, he is, I think, always just recommending me stuff that he thinks is good for me. You know,
He's a
he's
big
always
brother.
done that. He's always been like, yeah, he guides me in that sense a bit, and I've always appreciate that very much. So if you're listening, Aaron, I love you very much. Um, but yeah, so I think I was about 18. Yeah, I think 18 or 19. I spoke to Karen about this part of my life, that really I was a very bad teenager. I wasn't interested in any of this stuff at all. It was really just drinking a lot and playing video games, and you know, it's the usual story, really, until you hit kind of a rock bottom and you're not doing well in school, and then you realize that even when you're at your worst, your family still loves you. And that
Hmm.
feeling was just so powerful, so incomprehensible to me, that someone would love me through all of that, because I never really put it to the test that far. But when I saw that, I realized that there was something very real about my family, and partially also about Christianity, because they were so much inspired by that I could see in retrospect how much love they had for me. But then I think by virtue of that shift in mind state, I guess I was more receptive to learning from someone like Peterson. So I guess I would say 18 or 19 years old that I started to take that work seriously. And I'm a very all or nothing type of person. So then I wanted to watch everything, and same with Treveki. I just wanted to watch everything that I could find. And so that's how that went. And yeah.
Yeah, that they that kind of love, I've experienced that myself from my wife more specifically, but also from family, in our life, in our relationship, as I mentioned earlier. And I think that is the radically powerful transforming power of love and forgiveness and all those things. Makes sense why all that would seem to intersect. I remember thinking, but the ages between like 18 and 21 in my life, like I felt like there was a huge amount of time, a huge amount of
Mm,
space. I don't know if you
mm.
look back in the last several years feeling that,
Yeah, same.
um,
I would say so.
because,
Yeah.
now 3 years, I'm like, that's not, but there is so much, rapid change with responsibility and where you're headed and making a lot of big decisions, just like you're in the middle of it, that it really is. It is a big time, and it's awesome that you're like I was mentioning earlier, like that there's other voices in the culture that are breaking through and helping synthesize, this these two worlds that didn't seem like they could like meet, this faith
Yeah.
and then this rational thing that was happening,
Yeah.
and you're really part of that fruit, and but it wasn't just the ideas; it was also tangible through your family. Tell me about,
Mhm.
I heard Paul kind of poking at the fact that your dad is a theologian. Like, what work has he done? I'm not familiar with him, and what yeah, what kind of church or part of Christianity that have you been involved in?
Yeah. So my father later in life got a PhD in theology. So he, after he was already working for some years and already had some children, I think it was like early 2000s. I was definitely already born, so I was like 5 years old or so. I think he got his PhD in theology because it had always been a passion of his, but he wanted to be responsible for his family first before he chased that passion, which I think, in retrospect, was a wise decision. Um, and I think my parents just went to the closest church they could find near our house, which is a Protestant church. I don't know if there's anything more specific about that denomination. I think it's simply Protestant. Um, but my father is not absolute in his Protestantism at all. So I think if it was an Orthodox church that was there, or if it was a Catholic church that was there, he might have just gone there. But I'm not sure about that. I think he's very similar to Paul Vander Klay, actually, in the way he speaks about faith.
Yeah,
Yeah, so he's also like, I think the difference between him and Paul is that I was asking Paul about Christianity's exclusivity, and Paul was speaking about letters being, um, I don't know if he said wrongfully addressed or not perfectly
yeah.
addressed. I don't know exactly the term he
Like
used.
the ones that don't get to Santa but are being
Yeah,
sent up anyways.
yeah, exactly. So, like, if someone writes a letter out to Allah, even though God doesn't acknowledge that as the right, you know, addressee, but my father doesn't necessarily see it like that because I feel similar to him in that I simply don't understand other traditions well enough. Or speaking about Hinduism, for example, I just don't know. And I think he's similar. He always told me, like, for me, Christianity. He said, for me, Christianity is a toolkit, and I know my relationship with Christ, and I know what it brings me and the people around me. So I have deep trust in that. But I'm not in a position to judge. And I myself was ready to really say this is the highest with like certainty. And I had to talk about that with him, which was very positive. And maybe later in life I will have that conviction because I know a lot of people in the corner do. But I'm too aware of my ignorance to say that. But but yeah, that's a bit of a tangent in my in my answer to your
Oh.
simple question.
No, I think that was kind of brought into this space with the Brendan Graham Dempsey
Yeah.
conversations. I watched first his with Jordan Hall and then with Paul, and then I had him on the channel and talked to him in my own. And that's really the rub, like between what he would say, like meta modern religion, which is a type of transcendent universalism that's like, well, what can we take from everything and get past where we're at right now to this ascendant reality? But then there's also a I guess what in this kind of space of acting like there's a meta-modern Christianity where it's like all this stuff within Christianity is there some kind of ascendant. Oh, there's this is all of Christianity, this meta look at all of Christianity. And I mean, that's the experiment taking place in our little world here. And I experienced that in my own life. I could honestly, except for the fact that I live in the South in America where there's dozens and dozens of churches, hundreds of churches in my town of 10,000, hundreds of churches. Now, some of them,
Wow.
I mean, they're like tiny little Pentecostal churches. There's, Hispanic churches, African-American churches. There's lots of evangelical churches. There's, one Catholic church and there's, there's the main ones like the First Baptist and First Presbyterian and First Methodist, and then there's several of those like lots of the Baptist and lots of Church of Christ. So you kind of have to, even in a small town, you're kind of like, well, where do I come from? But I feel like, I kind of feel like myself, like your dad, like I probably in a way could get into any of those where I'm at right now and just kind of be happy to be there. But I've also got this whole space of too much option in a way. So yeah, that's interesting. Tell me more about the Netherlands. Tell me more about the culture there. I heard you say to Paul that you grew up, a lot of American, like U.S. influence because of things like YouTube and because of the internet. Like you kind of had two cultures raising you. But what is distinctive about the Netherlands?
About the Netherlands. Let me know if my connection is a bit unstable, by the way, if I'm talking, if it sounds okay. Because I was
Yeah, it sounds
just
good now. It's a little
drifting a
blurry a
bit.
second ago.
You hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. What is distinct about the Netherlands? Well, the Netherlands is quite secular, I would say, overall, at least explicitly so. So if you ask people on the streets, are you Christian? Are you this or that? I think a lot of them would say that they are not. But a lot of them are like culturally Christian, like Richard Dawkins is saying now. I think they don't realize that once they stop believing in the story, that they're probably going to lose that cultural Christianity. I think the Netherlands is quite Protestant overall in the last couple of centuries, I'd say. Is this a religious question or more of a broad question about the
Very
Netherlands?
broad. Yeah. That's fine though. Either way.
The Netherlands, people here are quite good at English, I would say. I think we are very Americanized, especially the younger generations, as I said to Paul. I think that, so for example, if you go to Germany, a lot of the TV shows, they will be dubbed in German. It's similar in some Scandinavian countries, or if you go to France, I think it's also similar, where they will just put the French language over the English one. So you're watching a Hollywood movie, you just hear French. In the Netherlands, we don't have that. Like we have subtitles. So we have been very Americanized, which I think is partially why we're so good at English. It's because we just took it all in. Whereas other countries, I think, were much more hesitant with that. But that also means we lost a lot of our own tradition. I think a lot of us look down on Dutch traditions. Famously, we have the Sinterklaas tradition, which is where they're related to Santa Claus, which creates a lot of controversy because the helpers are they're Black Pete's, that's what they're called, and so that raised a lot of controversy with people from America that came to the Netherlands, where they saw that as slavery, and I think there's a point to that for sure. But so overall, it adds to the sentiment of Dutch people, I think, not as seeing a lot of value in their tradition. At least I live in the city. Of course, it's different when you're from the village. But yeah, those are some things I would say about the Netherlands. I think people are quite friendly, but also very direct. That's difficult for some people. Some people find that to be a complete relief. So my partner, she's French, and in France, the culture is often more dancing around the truth and like not really saying it. But here, people will just tell you, like you get something in your teeth, they'll tell you, or you're doing something wrong at work, they'll tell you very bluntly, but because they want to help you, it's not out of a meanness.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there's Southern hospitality is a little bit of more like that French thing that you're talking about. But then when people talk
Mhm.
about rudeness, like up north, it's a little bit
Yeah,
more like that.
yeah,
Um, so on that note, like, what is so I see. So is Aaron and Stefan like y'all kind of have like a relationship here
yeah.
on YouTube? And I know Stefan's in Germany. Where's Aaron at?
Aaron is in the middle of the country in the Netherlands.
Okay, so he's there with you.
Yeah.
What is kind of the European uh space with this corner? Like how do you see that? I don't know.
I think it is like slowly growing, but it's quite small. Like the Netherlands, we have an estuary group, but it's extremely small. It's not as active as a lot of us want it to be. Um, I think there might just be a lot of lurkers and not people that are not very participatory. But I've met a couple of them. I think it's not as vibrant yet, but there's work being done on that. So we had a German festival last year on which Aaron spoke as well about Nietzsche, and we'll have another one this year at my parents' place, hopefully, if all goes well, and then we'll see more of the German side pop up. But I mean, this all relates to this idea of community, right? In this little corner, and I think that's a lot related also to Paul. And I only got into Paul recently, partially because my brother guided him around the Netherlands the year back,
Oh yeah,
and
that's
then I
right.
met him. Yeah, I met him in Amsterdam last October. But I had not been really involved with this community aspect at all before that. I was just listening to Vervaeke and to Peterson. So I think that my brother would possibly answer this question better because he's a bit more involved in it. But we've had some estuaries, but it's still quite small. So I'd be excited to see it grow a bit more.
I mean, I I'm a little bit of both of that because I saw Paul early on, several hundred subscribers, making early content, just reactions to Peterson. Like I was seeing that in real time, like in 2017. But like you, I just listened to Peterson and Pageau and some of Vervaeke and Paul like on and off through the years.
Yeah,
And but I didn't realize there was a community subculture scene kind of developing over the last 4 or 5 years, really. And when I kind of made this video, my first video back in January, I was just kind of, I think I had seen one Friday morning stream that on Friday, he'll just like open up and people can pop in. And I was like, what is this? And people are talking. And I kind of think that that triggered something inside of me to be like, I want to talk about these things that have been basically a conversation in my head for almost 7 years because I just couldn't find really how to land that here.
yeah,
And a lot of what people see of Peterson is more of a political, brash figure that's, put forward and from different media and didn't encounter him in the same way that like you or I did. And so there's kind of like two ways, people encounter that as well. And so that was my kind of connection to this. And I think, um, yeah, that conference that Paul did over there, and when I've heard Charlie talk, or say Charlie's Little Corner, whenever I've heard Stephen talk, just about, like I said, oh, there's hundreds of churches in my little town, like, and he's like, what are y'all worried? Why are y'all talking about like all these American faith problems? There's like 5 people in my giant cathedral, coming to
yeah,
church.
yeah. I relate to that.
It is, yeah, it's strange.
Yeah.
It's so in the water here, especially in
Mm.
the South still. Like I have dozens and dozens of Christian friends, like
Wow.
I grew up with here, that we had like very serious experiences with faith. What I don't have is people, whatever this thing is, like even with what you experienced, kind of having this prodigal son experience in your life. It sounds like something about the about an I don't know if honesty is the right word, but something about like an honesty with suffering that whether it's existential or whether it's something that's really happening in your life, that I think that that's part of the conversation around Peterson, the people that slide into one section of him that it relates to. And then then if it's existential and people are finding more meaning through somebody like Pageau and Vervaeke, I think that's part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's see, you're Gen Z. How do you view millennials? Like, what's your perspective on the millennial people?
Well, you tell me, where's the cutoff? Is it 95?
Yeah, I think so. My brother is he's 10 years younger than me, and he was born in 95. And so I think that he is either considered like the last of or the beginning of, something like that.
So, and where's the other cutoff? So you have 95 until
Somewhere early 80s. Yeah.
early 80s. Okay. I'm even trying to think like who I know from the, I mean, I guess, for example, Robert Breedlove should be in that bracket.
Yes.
Like these people that, um, I don't know, you grow up in the 90s, if I'm correct. Yeah, you grow up in the 90s. You witness the emergence of like the internet and technology, which is
Yeah.
crazy. It's an interesting generation in that sense that you've seen both sides of it.
Yeah.
And I think that can go both ways. Like I know some people in that age group, a lot of my colleagues are actually, um, and they love technology, and you have others that are completely averse to it and that haven't integrated into it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, generally, yeah. Go ahead.
There's people a few years older than me that are kind of like yeah, like you're saying, they're kind of they they have a smartphone, but they're not like savvy.
Yeah,
And then there's people that can operate really well in this, like myself or something like that.
yeah,
The point that you made, like 95, Windows 95 sticks out in my brain as kind of like the actual operating system was kind of this like shift forward. I was
yeah,
10, and the internet, even though it was slow, it's like, oh, I can like look up cheat codes for my video game.
yeah,
Like, or like
yeah,
a walkthrough from, I would like, oh, I don't have to go buy a book at the store. And then obviously got an
yeah,
email. That all happened between like 95 and 2000. Like I had some real tangible, oh, I could use the internet to help me with video games.
yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
then,
actually crazy.
I got a cell phone when I was 16, just, like a Nokia brick, just like, and that was, yeah, 16 years old. I was 2002.
Mhm.
And then everything hit at the end of college, which was Facebook started when I was like a junior in college. I was in 2006. And we were doing a little bit of like MySpace and this thing called Zanga, which was mainly like blogging. And MySpace was more like Facebook. But then 2007, the first iPhone released. And then by 2010, Safari on the iPhone had kind of like solidified a little bit.
Yeah.
And then Twitter, that made mobile Twitter crazy. And yeah, like there's like definitely like a timeline of like that experience and that integration as it was happening and being a young person, just like, oh, this is the next thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was fun.
No, but like it's much more interesting hearing it from your perspective because I don't have that perspective. I just grew up inside of it.
Yeah,
So I love
yeah.
asking people about it.
Well,
Yeah.
what do you feel like that? What's distinctive about that for you? Just always having like, when do you remember getting on YouTube for the first time?
Very early, I think.
Yeah, my
Too
son's been on.
early, really.
Yeah.
Huh?
I have a 7-year-old who, we put all
Yeah.
sorts of little shows on from YouTube, but for all my kids, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So I imagine very, very early on, like maybe 5 or 6 years old. But like what I think is interesting about my generation is that a lot of us don't watch TV as much anymore. We're really internet generation.
Mhm.
So I remember when I was into video games as a kid, I would like to watch streamers. That's also a big phenomenon now
Yes.
with young boys. Like they watch these guys or girls play video games and just comment on it, and it makes you feel like you're kind of there. You have your little community, and it's just really odd. I think it's really we have not just the usual couple of TV channels, but we have millions of different internet channels now that we can plug into, and that's for better and for worse, because you can really find your people, but you can also feel even more alienated from the environment around you. And that's definitely a lot of what I'm seeing around me.
Yeah, it's hard to find this term that's kind of came out, the monoculture. Like, it's hard to tap into that.
Yeah.
Even this year, the most monoculture thing I experienced was the Super Bowl with the Taylor Swift narrative going on with that. Like, my daughters are 14 and 10. And it was
Yeah.
like my 10-year-old watched the whole Super Bowl and she's never watched a football game in her life. That's powerful. And the other thing I noticed was all the actors in the commercials. Like, when I was growing up, Super Bowl commercials were interesting, but there was nobody famous in a Super Bowl commercial. And then this year, it was all A-list actors, but the youngest one was like my age, Michael Cera.
Yeah.
He was like the youngest actor and everyone else, because that was the only time that people were going to get eyeballs, like all in one place.
I see. That's actually such an interesting. Yeah, that's true.
It was one of the only used to back in the day, Lucas. Everyone was watching primetime television, like you were saying, and everyone had to be there at the same time.
Yeah.
And then they go to work and they would be talking about the stuff that was on television last night. But now when you go to work, it's like, I don't know if I can talk to this person about this thing because it's kind of political. And I don't know if I can talk to this person about this thing because I don't think they like that stuff. And it's just this, like you're saying, it's even for our age, it's hard to find places to connect, to feel known, to feel together, feel unity.
Sense. Yeah. That's it. It reminds me of Jonathan Pageau saying that when people go to church, they have an attention that's connected to each other, and then the more you go into your own little thing, the less you have that. But in a way, it's kind of what you're describing. It's kind of been positive for me in the sense that I cannot talk to anyone about monoculture things happening, but I have to go back to the basics, and I actually like that a lot, where you get to really know a person, because what you're going to talk about with someone when you really don't know, if you share anything that you watched recently, you just get into their story. And I've really enjoyed getting to know people from the ground up in that sense. And then later on, you can maybe talk about some things, but it turns into a very, I guess, a more of a fundamental conversation that I often have with people, where I know, like, I don't feel like speaking about politics with a person or speaking about a TV show, because probably they watch their own TV shows because there's millions now. But what we can connect on more fundamental things, I guess. Yeah.
I love that perspective. It's made me think about two things. Like, one of the last things that was binding at least the millennials together was like Game of Thrones. Was one of the last things. People have watch parties because it was still serialized. Like, my brother-in-law would have watch parties with his, he's like with his lawyer friends and stuff. And it's like, but now there's nothing that's like hitting across the board, because that was based on a book series. That's part of that. Dune is trying to have a moment, Barbie movie, there's a few little things trying to bind people together. But what's interesting about that, and even our conversation and going to a place like Symbolic World, is it's almost like we've forgotten that we could, as I was talking about the water cooler thing, it's almost like, oh, this is a place to have the water cooler conversation about this stuff. But it's like you had to go to Florida or make a conference to where people can hit the ground running from that shared experience. And it's such a unique experience, with it being philosophical or something like that, or theological. That's really difficult to find where you're at. So I'm just kind of thinking about that, why that is. And we probably have just forgotten that actually happened a lot more, but it was like you were saying, around a lot more superficial things. And now it's like, well, maybe we just start at, hey, man, tell me about yourself, because nobody knows anything about anyone anymore.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because it brings me back to like a couple years ago. So I had so like 18, 19, I get into Peterson for Vaki, and I basically lose contact with all my friends because I'm like, I have nothing to connect about anymore. And I moved places and all these things, and then it's cathartic when you speak to someone that has had similar influences. So for me, speaking to my brother, for example, was always very nice, because I'm like, okay, he really understands me and stuff. But then more and more, the more I had those interactions, the more I realized that, well, if that's the only thing we share, that doesn't necessarily mean that we gel as people. It's just that we both have had these very specific interests. Um, Whereas there's probably so many other people out there that are worth connecting to, but just because I don't have a specific shared interest with them, why shouldn't I connect with them? And then I found that um, I can actually connect to a lot of people about a lot of different things. But again, the more fundamental things, where I started to really just talk to strangers about just very random things, just bumping into them in the train, asking them about where they're from or where they're going, and yeah, so that opened that up for me. Whereas I think for a lot of people still it's difficult when they're in this little corner to have meaningful conversations outside of the corner. Whereas I do really, really recommend that, because I think partially what we learn is what I spoke to you about in the live stream, is this implicit ethic that we have when we speak to each other, where we let each other be heard. And and I guess there's a goodness underneath it that we're trying to get closer to. And so, yeah, like I said there as well, carrying that out is so valuable. And I'm trying to do just that, where it's no longer just about the philosophical or the theological interesting topics that we've learned about, but it's really about the beautiful people underneath.
And to recognize, I think this is something I've been trying to, I guess, encourage, is there are these hierarchies of conversation, of depth and meaning, but that doesn't mean that if you're landing in a conversation about sports or video games or something, how somebody grew up, that doesn't mean that doesn't hold a good and natural space on that hierarchy. And I think it's you need to be able to find the conversations at whatever that place, that deeper, meaningful place for you. Like you need that. Like I needed that. Like I'm doing that right now. But not at the expense of like being able to, when the opportunity arises, to like just have that other kind of connection. I'll give you a case in point. So there was this Taylor Swift impersonator that did a concert in our little town. And I took my two daughters and my niece, and I was just the girl dad. Like, I was like the chaperone. My 14-year-old had a couple of friends, and it was really wholesome. It was just a bunch of kids from our town in this like theater. And at the end, I was like, I was the first person in line. I made sure that I had the things she could autograph, and there was this whole. So I was right where she was going to be after the conference or the concert. I was like, "Yay, girl dad, champion!" And I'm posting it on Facebook, which is where a lot of my like high school and college relationships exist and family and stuff. And then I saw my buddy's wife, good friend of mine I grew up with. I was like, "Where's James? Like James should, he should have come. We used to play music together." And she's like, he wanted to come. And he texts me later and he's like, "Oh, dude, I should have come." It's like, that's an example of a relationship around something totally superficial that actually holds a lot of meaning. The fact that we're like connecting all this and our daughters are at this thing and we have so much history, and we might not talk about any of the things that we're talking about in this, but it's like it fits very nicely into a relationship of history and meaning that's important. And I encourage people to like accept those things on face value and try to build, even if you build some of those relationships around something else. And because not everything is in, my wife reminds me, not everything's in this head space. And I liked how you went to all taking that to worship, like with what Pageau talked about, because that's also maybe one of the reasons people are also being attracted to this unified experience. That it's hard, well, I'm not going to pay for a football ticket every week to go have this unified experience, or even this concert. People are paying a lot of money but like church is something that you can do that. You need to be giving to the poor and stuff, but that you can do that weekly. That unified experience that we're like hungry for, embodied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm also saying, when you spoke about the Taylor Swift impersonator, that you don't need that good of an excuse to just connect with people. And I'm seeing that more and more. Like recently with my friends, we've just been connecting about cycling to the ocean in the morning and just going in for a sec. And it's like, it's not really about that so much. Like it's about so much more than that. It's about having a consistent routine of seeing each other and checking up on each other and seeing how we're doing. And then you're very right in making the point about church, where that's that, but so much more, so much deeper, where you introduce the vertical relationship where God comes into the mix. Of course, I think God is in many things, and God is where people where people are that are in good faith, but even more so in church, I think it's magnified. And so, yes, it's great that we're doing this, and then eventually, hopefully, it leads to more participation in sacred space.
Yeah, how have those kind of conversations, like you're talking about the cycling, but also the church, like has that been like, how have these people like Vervaeke and Pageau, like what kind of influence have they had on you in the last couple of years too, other than Peterson?
Yeah, so for Vakey, I think I owe so much because I was most receptive to him when I was younger. So when I was most changing in my worldview, I was listening the most to Vervaeke and Peterson, I think. And I think Vervaeke with this framework of the 4 Ps, so the propositional, perspectival, participatory, and the procedural, got me to see got me to open up a new frame as to in which I could interpret church going, for example, where I grew up so propositionally, so much people asking me, like, do you really believe this? Do you really believe that? To just seeing, when I spoke also about that experience with my family, seeing how those people behaved, seeing how they participated in God's glory, seeing how they acted. And so Vervaeke got me to realize that switch in perspective, where I no longer looked at people as to what they believed, but I looked at how they acted, um, and I could see so much more value in that. Because it's, in a way, propositions are so superficial, because a lot of people don't even know what they believe, but they will say what they believe, but they probably don't even know. But I can see how they act, and I can see how they act when no one's watching sometimes, when when the spotlights aren't on. And so that I owe a lot for Jonathan. Of course, also you learn a lot from this guy because he's so brilliant. He's intelligent. He teaches you everything about cognitive science. You get a whole history of the Western world, and it's like full of insights and things you remember. But in retrospect, that's not what stuck with me most, even though I learned a lot from that. But when I speak about it, I think so much more about also how John behaves and the goodness John tries to pull out of people. Um, some of his work that's most influential on me is when he speaks about the hermeneutics of beauty and letting someone's beauty unfold in front of you, and when he speaks about falling deeper in love with this partner, like that's the stuff that sticks with me because it's most real to me. Um, so that's what that started with. For Vake, I listened to the most, and then Jonathan Pageau I got into later because I think at some point when Peterson got sick, Pageau filled this gap. I think that's been pretty well documented. The first time I watched Grim Grizz, he spoke about that. Like Peterson got sick, and then this guy came around, the symbolic world, and it was just perfect timing. Jonathan, I listened to, and I'm like, you know something that I don't, and you're onto something. Like you see the world in a way that I would love to be able to see it, but I'm not able to do that just yet. So I'm just gonna keep listening, even though a lot of what he's saying did not make any sense to me at the time, but it made just enough sense for me to stay listening.
Probably because of Peterson.
Yeah. Yeah, because here's this guy who seems to be very rational, and you can really follow him in a left hemispheric manner where you can follow the analytical argument. And he's obsessed with Jonathan Pageau as being one of the deepest thinkers he's ever encountered. And sometimes Jonathan will say something that seems so absurd from a materialist frame, but then it actually makes a lot of sense if you get deeper into the symbolic worldview. So yeah, I owe Jonathan so much. The main thing that I think Jonathan taught me was the importance of participating. Um, He's the reason why I always wrestle with this question about going to church, and why I really think I should. Like, you think he really articulates that super well. And so the both of them, these two gentlemen, have been foundational in my understanding. But I think now also I'm at a stage where I'm just going to take their lessons and I'm going to try to embody them more. And I don't need to listen to them as much anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we all only have so much to give,
Yeah.
that from our experience and from what we study, and unless you're continuing to put things in, and and they have a message and they have a purpose with what they're doing, and it's going to continue to get out to more and more people. But if you've been in that space for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, then it's like, okay. I also think that's part of what was like to try to get into an actual, participating in a conversation, or obviously you were talking about in worship as well, like putting these things, because these ideas, they sound so fast and interesting, but then like we put them into our lives and it's like, go to church, sing this song, listen to the Bible. Like they're not like crazy, ride a bike
Yeah.
with friends.
Yeah.
Like, but consciously doing that and consciously appreciating them, I think is part of the key, and realizing what it's consciously giving them value that you can't give through just proposition.
Mm.
And the other thing, the one of the things recently that I heard Pageau, that's one of these examples maybe of hard to understand, is he goes, from my perspective, or the Earth is only 8,000 years old, or he's like, he's saying that not because what the geology says, but because that's what humanity maybe can just say, or has been able to say, that we exist or something. And so
Yeah.
that's how old the Earth is, because that's how long we've been able to say I live on Earth.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like, but it's like, that's almost like a symbolic understanding of how old the Earth is. And I remember hearing that, like, what does he mean? What is, it's like, and it takes a second to kind of like wrap your brain around what he's saying about something symbolically. And that was one of those bridges, I guess, of, because what that also allows you to have a conversation with people who may scientifically be stuck there. And you can say, yeah, in a certain way, I see that's how old the Earth is.
Yeah.
And then you can be like, well, I kind of theologically see it this way, but obviously, the scientific record would show some different things. And so you can have a conversation over here. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And anyways, that was what was coming to mind when you were talking about that.
Man, yeah, it's funny because I know Jonathan and Matthew, that they when they grew up inside of, I don't know if it was a Protestant church,
I think it was
Baptist church,
Mm-hmm.
where they really empathized so hard with atheists, because a lot of people in there also, in their experience, did have this materialistic understanding of the world, but then they put the Bible inside of that. So it's like taking that 8,000-year-old number and not make it symbolic, but make it materialistic. And that's, I think, where the great divide happened. And then some people will come out of that being like, okay, I'm hardcore atheist. Some will come out of that being like, no, I'm holding on to this even more. And if you say anything that conflicts with my worldview, I will banish you out of my
Because
life.
it falls apart.
Yes, exactly. So I had that for myself in my life. But luckily I had people around me that could see it in a more symbolic manner, I guess.
That was kind of the conversation. I kind of tried to have this on Twitter, pardon me, the other day, where so I had this conversation with Brendan Graham Dempsey, and we're talking, something that was very influential in, I guess, kind of deconstructing his Christian faith, was the historical criticism, like the historical research of like the literary nature of Scripture. This wasn't necessarily written by Moses. This wasn't necessarily written by Peter, X, Y, and Z, like all this stuff. And I'd been introduced to that in college, in a really, because I have an undergrad in biblical studies, and from a Baptist school, and it was in, like you said, kind of this safe space. And your dad could help you if you had any of those questions. He could walk you through that, no problem. But when he was a young teenager, those things were causing, in kind of a tradition that was probably less intellectual that he was from, and it really created a lot of problems for him, I think. And I was well, kind of my perspective was more like what you said. I feel like the bigger problem within, and what Peterson actually built the bridge, a big part of the bridge he built back was actually based on evolution to the church for people. This kind of synthesis, and where you didn't have to choose. And I think that was that's actually one of the bigger works that he did, that you just hit on, that I tried to shared it with him on Twitter recently. Is I think that was actually the bigger, more than the historicity of the Bible. In a way, you could get there, but culturally, it had to do with this more of the issues with materialism, and so I think you're hitting on that. That's my diagnosis, actually.
But can you expand on that with evolution? How the evolution ties into that? Or are you saying the evolution of
what?
Never mind. I think you used the word evolution as a development, let's say.
Well, just that there was a big between the people, why people, like you were saying, went into materialist atheism, or held very tightly to a literal reading of history and scripture, and you kind of had to choose. There was no bridge between that. There were people talked about theistic evolution and all this kind of stuff, but that didn't really work for the materialist mindset, because it was still like in a materialist framework. And the psychologist took it and made it he took evolution and he made it a psychological thing, to where like this works psychologically for you. You didn't realize how much you needed this psychologically. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll go participate in this psychologically. But there was also history and trauma probably drawing people into these spaces as well. But then following that followed some belief. Again, or for the first time or something, through the participatory, through the embodied community. I think my story didn't turn out that way, but I was paying attention to all that stuff. It didn't turn out that way for the same reasons, but I was paying attention to the new atheist stuff very closely in the mid-aughts because of YouTube, and because Dawkins' book came out in like 2008, 2009, The God Delusion, and I was like leading worship at this church camp in Florida, and a bunch of us would go to like Barnes and Noble, which is a big chain bookstore in the States, and I walked in. I remember seeing this whole like pyramid of Richard Dawkins books. They were like silver and shiny, and it was like this. And it's like The God Delusion, and here I am at a camp, like singing to God, and I'm like, "Whoa, what does this mean? Is what I'm building my life on true? Is what or am I deluded?" So that became kind of an insecurity that I began to walk through.
How did you get out of that?
Well, there's two parts to that question. Somebody that helped me was a Christian pastor and theologian named Tim Keller. I don't know if you've heard that name.
I've seen it many times, comment sections, and I've heard it in reference, but never.
He had a book called The Reason for God, which was kind of a direct, talking about rational reasonability and rationalism. It was a direct response kind of to what was taking place with new atheism. And he was largely influenced by a guy named Charles Taylor, who was a Canadian theologian that was kind of dealing with modernism and Christianity and the problems therein. So he kind of popularized a lot of his ideas, and he began writing in the last 10 years of his life, Tim Keller did, about the Christian faith and how certain things made sense, were reasonable in the face of being called deluded. So he also was early into YouTube. There were a lot of his sermons. There were a lot of conversations. He wasn't really a debater, but conversations in the space. And as things were kind of turning, like he had a conversation with Jonathan Haidt. He actually spoke at Google one time. And so as a person in ministry, he was kind of a beacon, to kind of like, he had good answers for things that helped settle some of the insecurity. People like C.S. Lewis played that role in people's lives as well. Some to me, but I would credit more to Keller. And that a pastor that I was working with at our church he had gone to UCLA, got an undergrad, and then he went to Yale Divinity and got his Master's of Divinity from Yale, which was not a conservative institution. But he came out of it and he was this huge Tim Keller fan and was not like falling off the edge of orthodoxy or something. That was also really helpful.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. But then that was more of the propositional side of it, hanging on propositionally.
Okay.
The other side was, that was more, I don't know, that's a story I've told a lot on this channel, but if we schedule another conversation together on your channel, maybe we'll unpack it there.
Yeah, we can pull in it there. Yeah, that sounds good.
But yeah, dude.
Okay.
One of the other things I think I wanted to hit a little bit as we're kind of closing down here, I was wanting to hit a little bit more on, like your experience with where your channel is going and what you're aiming at. But even these, I'll be honest, man, when I saw Robert Breedlove, I watched all of his sailor stuff. Like I watched all of it, and I became a big believer in Bitcoin because of him. And so when I saw you had that conversation, I was like, oh my gosh, that was a big deal to me to see that.
Yeah.
And so what was your fascination with him? I know you talked a lot, but for you just personally, what brought you into wanting to have that conversation with him?
Well, I've been following Breedlove from the start of his channel, which is 2020, 21, I guess. This was at a time of my life where I got really into self-help stuff, so I wanted to learn how to invest. So I read the older books about investing and just trying to figure out the stock market and this and that. And then I stumbled upon Robert Breedlove, and for the people that don't know, he's someone that describes himself as a freedom maximalist and a Bitcoin philosopher. He's more of a libertarian leaning person, and he hosts the What is Money show, which is centered around that question, what is money? But it leads him down to many different paths. So he speaks also to people such as John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau, and he speaks to all sorts of people, anthropologists, but also economists. And it's just quite a philosophical podcast, but also for people that are not really familiar with philosophy, because Robert himself is not really a philosophy major or anything. He's just an accountant who turned into a hedge fund manager and then encountered Bitcoin at some point. And yeah, so I just wanted to learn about Bitcoin because I thought maybe it was interesting to invest in. And here's this guy, and you spoke about Saylor as well, Michael Saylor, who is I don't know if he's the owner of this company, MicroStrategy, or CEO, but he and Robert did a series about, I don't know if it's money, much more foundationally, it's about
first principle
understanding of money, and then human action. And yeah, they just went down the whole rabbit hole with history as well, and economy, I guess, in a sense, but making a case for why Bitcoin, I guess. Also going over why gold has been valuable in the past, why we went into the modern age with paper money. And I just found all of this very interesting because partially I was learning what to invest in, but I was also learning about philosophy and about even metaphysics and all these things through Robert's channel. So I was very interested in this channel for the longest time. I think I watched most every episode for a very long time, and sometimes I'd leave comments, and I got into contact with Robert. think about a year ago or so, personally. And yeah, we had talks about working together, but that didn't fully work out, because I would have had to move to Miami for that, to help with this podcast, to help produce it, I guess. But yeah, I've been basically very involved in that. I think that I see Bitcoin as very foundational in the future. And I just wanted to talk with Robert because I find him interesting personally, because I don't hear so much about his personal story. And I was just interested also in what he thinks more deeply about reality. And I always also try to poke holes into the Bitcoin guys, into their worldview, to see what's up, because a lot of them, even when they're Bitcoiners, it doesn't say much about the rest of their life often, like what they
Mhm.
believe and what they're into. And I know Robert is kind of like interested also in Christianity and religion, so I also wanted to poke into that a bit. But yeah, so I kind of know him personally a bit, like we text sometimes, but not super well or anything. So I just asked him to have a conversation, and we had it, and it was good.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that was the
that's how that
same.
happened.
That's really cool. That's cool that you know him. That I've noticed that uh, kind of some of his tweets and stuff, like kind of sometimes about God, and it seems like he's kind of on a religious journey as well, a little bit. Because my main
Yeah,
fascination with that is this, and it's even where you popped into my stream, was that conversation about trust, and how trust is this fundamental economic, supposed to be economic principle, and that is built, and it's about relationship, and that Bitcoin's trying to contend with that, maybe solve that as an issue. Don't know if it'll
yeah,
if it can or not, but that, and trust and truth for me, yours truly, like this idea of authentic, being being finding yourself in a type of trueness, in a type, and building things off of that, your life, relationships, economy, science, building those things off of truth is a well, we've done better and worse at different times in civilization, I think, and if we're going to have any hope moving forward, I think that's also a part of this meaning conversation.
yeah.
So, well, dude, do you have any other thoughts you want to get out here? Anything else going on?
Well, I have a lot of questions for you. I had them already, but I know this is about. Well, we'll do it in the next conversation that we'll host
Yeah, man.
online. So I'm going to leave that for them. But
Okay.
I'll just say that I am very inspired by your channel. I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I'm excited to see where your thing is going. I
Thanks.
don't even know where my thing is going, so that's kind of why I wanted to ask you, just to see like what you're looking at. But yeah, for now, I'm just happy to be in this space. I'm grateful to everyone listening, participating, and interacting on the internet. And again, encourage everyone listening: go outside, speak to people, carry the spirit forth, because the virtual dimension is useful, but not enough.
It's real. It's part of reality. It's not all of reality.
Exactly.
All
That's
right,
what it is.
man. Well, we'll end it on that. Thanks, Lucas, for coming on. And I'm gonna hit this
Thank you
video.
so
We'll
much.
end this thing backstage, man.
Thank you so much, Christian.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.